I'm Rachel Nunes, your host. Here with us now, Krystal Noiseux of Rhode Island Resource Recovery. Welcome.
Thanks, Rachel.
And she's here to talk to us a little bit about food waste, which massive problem in our country and across the world. But tell us a little bit about food waste and especially here in Rhode Island.
Sure.
Tell us about it.
So in the United States, the Natural Resource Defense Council says that about 40% of all the food that we're growing is not actually making it,
Wow.
not eaten.
Wow.
And in Rhode Island, we're estimating that we have about 100,000 tons of food waste that is buried in the central landfill every year, to put that in a local perspective.
Wow, that's an incredible amount of food.
That's a lot, yes.
So what would you say is the biggest culprit? Why does food get wasted so often?
Yeah, so a lot of times people will think about it on a commercial scale and think, oh, it happens on the farm, and it does, and it happens in restaurants and markets and things like that. Totally does. But the majority of it actually comes from us in our homes. We're big food wasters, and that's really where we have the most control to do something about it. And so there's strategies that we can all use in our kitchen day to day to dramatically reduce the amount of food that's going to waste.
So what kind of steps can we as consumers take to help cut down our own personal food waste?
So one of the most interesting things that I find is that just being cognizant of how much you're wasting makes a difference. We find that most people think that they waste less than they do. And so we've actually done some pilot projects where we've had families keep their food waste for a couple of weeks in a clear container in their fridge just to see it build up and see how much there is. And just seeing that and recognizing that inspires people to make changes. Mm-hmm. So that's part of what we call getting smart about your food waste. Another important thing to remember is that there's a lot of confusion out there about expiration dates.
Absolutely.
You'll see all different types of wording on containers.
Yeah, we have use by, sell by, best by.
And then you actually have an expiration date on infant formula. That's the only thing that actually expires and has a regulated expiration date. Everything else is just quality that the manufacturer wants to put on to get the food in and out of the supermarkets. And so a lot of times we're throwing things out because we think that they're not edible anymore, and they're totally fine to eat. And another strategy is just shopping smart. So this is the idea of actually going for your groceries with meals in mind and a list that you've pre-made.
Instead of just buying willy-nilly.
Just going in and picking things off the shelf, that leads to us overbuying, and then we have a lot of food that we don't use. Mm-hmm. And so really being honest with yourself about how often you cook at home. Do you cook 7 days a week? Do you really want to plan out 7 meals, or is it something where you eat out, you eat at other people's households? Being realistic about that, generating a list of what you need, and then actually shopping your own cupboards and your fridge first. Oftentimes people will buy something, bring it home, they're moving things around in the fridge, and then they're like, oh, I already have that, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a huge way to do it, just with the smart shopping. Another strategy is smart storage. So the way that we store, especially our fruits and vegetables, can have a huge impact on how long they last.
Absolutely. I know with, say, strawberries, it seems you buy them, you wash them, you go to eat them the next day, and
there's mold all over them. Right. So a perfect strategy with any kind of berries, they hate to be wet. So don't bring them home from the market, wash them and put them in the fridge. Just put them in the fridge. And then when you're going to eat half a dozen, then you wash them, and you'll prevent a lot of food waste that way. One of my favorite things, I cook with a lot of cilantro, and so if you just throw that in your fridge, it's going to wilt in a couple days. But if you cut it like fresh flowers and put it in water in your fridge, it'll last 10 days. So just even knowing that, and you can download storage guides online. You can get them from Resource Recovery's website. That goes a far way. Another technique is smart prep. So there's 2 things to think about with smart prep. One of them is prepping food so that if it's something that you intended to grab as a snack, it's ready for you. You can see it in the fridge. It's already chopped up. It's in clear containers. You're way more likely to eat it if it's kind of prepped and ready to go than if you have to do the prep at the point of eating it. I am totally guilty of this.
Oh, I'll do the same.
Yeah. If I put in, just at work, if I just put an apple in my bag, it will not get eaten half the time. But if I chop it up and put like lemon juice on it to keep it from going brown and bring it into work that way in a clear container,
convenient.
100% of the time I grab the apple and I eat it. And another thing to consider is food prep for your meals. And this comes in handy if you have like a late night at work and you had this idea in your head that you were going to cook this meal, but you end up working late, you end up in traffic, your stomach's growling, you get home and like a butternut squash is staring at you.
Do I really want to cook it?
And
not
a lot
really
of times
going to get takeout.
Exactly. And then that builds up over time, and then you have all this, wasted food from that. So just bringing stuff home from the grocery store, prepping as much as you can. It's one mess to clean up.
Absolutely.
One big prep mess. It saves you a bunch of time.
And then it's done.
And then it is done. And then the final piece of advice I would give is smart saving. So it kind of loops full circle back to that shopping element. And it's the idea of, we have recipes, we cook with food, but we don't always use all of the ingredients up. You always have some leftover this, that, and the other thing. So when you're putting together your shopping list for the next week, again, look at what you already have, especially in the fridge. Keep an area of things that need to be eaten up and used up first. There's some great apps out there. There's one called Supercook where you can just literally put in, I have like a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this, a little bit. Is there a meal that I can make from this? And they'll say, oh, yep, you just need, lemon, salt, pepper, and olive oil. And then you have a meal, and then you can use up those scraps. So it's really, it saves time, it saves a lot of money, and it builds these kind of skills in the kitchen that are much like, when you learn a new skill with cooking, it feels good. It feels like you've learned something that's helpful to you, and it's actually really engaging and fun when we teach families how to do this and they start to implement that in their lives.
Absolutely. And I know also there's a big movement now of doing things like making your own stock and ways to use maybe vegetable scraps, things you wouldn't think to, like ends of onions, or let's say we had a big seafood boil, we have a bunch of shells, or chicken carcass, instead of just throwing that away, we can make it into a stock or do something else with it.
Right, so this is the concept of how food is sometimes inedible, sometimes always inedible, and it depends on what your kitchen skills are and what you know about. So a perfect example is a stock. Another example is something like beet greens. Some people will buy beets, take off the greens, pitch the greens, and eat the beets. Other people actually saute, cook, and eat the greens. So some parts of, I don't know anyone that sits there and eats the rind of an orange, okay? And they might grind it up for a recipe. But there's certainly creative ways to use things that we've looked at as waste in the past, but we can definitely repurpose in our cooking routines at home, for sure.
And so going back a little bit to the whole confusing dates of expiration, sell by, use by, all of that. Which ones should we listen to? Which ones should we kind of keep an eye on? And which ones can we just ignore?
Everyone has to make their own decision about this, but the best indicator of whether food is good is your own senses, your own eyes, nose, taste, all of that. You can see, you can smell, and that's the best indicator. That's what we've basically our bodies have evolved to be able to sense when something is not good anymore. So you can use them as a general best practice, but I know a lot of people who say, oh, it's that date and therefore this food is not safe to eat, and that's completely incorrect. That's not true. It's just, like I said, a tool that the manufacturer wants to use because they want you to try their product when it's at, top notch, the best, most fresh quality, peak quality, and that's understandable, but a lot of people take it further and think, now I have to dump this, now I have to throw it out into the trash.
And of course, as well, the more we buy it and the more we say, oh, I can't use this anymore, I have to throw it out, the more likely we are to go back to the store, buy more, start the cycle over.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So smart marketing for companies, not so much for saving. And so when it comes to things like composting, how easy would it be for just the typical person to say start composting?
You can do it in 5 minutes a week. We teach compost workshops at Resource Recovery, but you can also go on our website and download a beginner's guide, and then we sell backyard compost bins at a discount. So normally if you went to the store, you'd probably buy them for $100 plus, but we sell them for $45 each, which is a great way to get started. You do need leaf and yard waste to mix in with your food scraps. You just can't throw all food scraps in there. You need to have a ratio of 3 to 1. Leaf and yard waste to food scraps. So fall is a great time to start if you've never done it before, to start for the first time. If you want to start now, you just have to get some kind of leaf and yard waste maybe that you've had piled up or from your neighbors, but that's a really important part of the process. You do have to collect the stuff in your kitchen. I really recommend people keeping it in their fridge or their freezer so that they're not worried about having it sit out for a week or having, any odors or fruit flies or anything like that. Just keep it in the fridge and you maybe empty it once a week, give the compost a little stir, check the moisture, but really your time into it, you can successfully compost in 5 minutes a week.
So what, besides the basic, banana peels and skins and all of those types of things, what can we compost and what can we compost? I know coffee grounds are popular for composting, but what what can't we include in there?
So in a backyard bin, it's not going to be big enough to get hot enough, to stay hot enough long enough to break things down like meat, dairy, eggs. Eggshells are fine, but the actual egg yolk, protein, like fish waste and anything like that. In a large-scale industrial compost operation, you can totally break down anything that was once living or part of once living. But in your backyard compost, you want to avoid that. And then anything that's fats, oils, greases, processed foods, you just don't want to attract any.
So generally more vegetable, plant-based.
Yep, definitely. Fruits and vegetables, yep.
And so what would you say, taking a more global view now, you mentioned restaurants and places like that. What needs to change on the individual, say, like individual restaurant level, or even why? Like, what do we need to do as a country to really tackle food waste?
Interestingly enough, the skills that we teach homeowners, and we do workshops just for this topic, we actually derive them from skills that are used at the level of industrial caterers and restaurants. So just like it's important for you to take an inventory and know what you have before you're ordering or going to the store is similar to what the restaurant has to do, really planning out, monitoring what is being ordered, what's not being ordered, making those adjustments accordingly, just like you would have to do at home. The same concepts of properly storing the food, prepping, what can be prepped ahead of time. You know, all of those things apply to restaurants. So you can go into a restaurant and actually there's some great software that's out there to assist. There's some free from the EPA to help a restaurant go through and use this system and figure out ways to reduce how much waste they're making.
And more on a national level, what can producers do to help reduce there?
Yeah, so a lot of the waste that happens, say, on a farm has to do with the quality that is required by the purchasers of the, say, like oranges, for example. And so if people will only buy oranges that are perfectly round and bright orange and don't have any speck on them.
Absolutely Instagrammable.
Absolutely Instagrammable, then that creates that demand, and then you have a lot of on-farm waste that no one will buy it because it's not perfect. And so even as a consumer, being willing to take the apple that's a little bit twisted or the orange that has a spot, I mean, no one wants to purchase something that is past, good or not.
Of course.
But the drive for this perfection of what that should look like is a huge driver for food waste on the production end of things. So we can make an impact on that as consumers by making different choices.
Great. And would you say things are looking up in terms of food waste as people become more aware of it, or do we have a while to go?
Definitely seen a raised awareness around composting, just in the number of compost bins that we sell and workshops that we do and just interest in it. I think that now we're just starting to scratch the surface to get people to think more about that first level of, before I even have to decide whether this goes in the trash or in the compost, let me see if I can prevent it from going to waste in the first place. Eat what it is that I intended to eat when I went and made this, this purchase at the store. And again, it's not just about saving space in the landfill or saving resources. It's about saving time and money for you too.
Absolutely, because it gets expensive to throw away so much food week after week.
Yep, and you will feel good when you start implementing these things. The families that we've done it with, we saw a 60% reduction in the amount of food they wasted.
Wow.
Huge.
Massive.
Really significant. And there was also just this feeling of having these new skills and being like proud of making these new decisions in the kitchen, or just using a new app to come up with a recipe or a shopping list app. People really enjoy the process, and I think that's what really makes it stick.
Great. Well, Krystal, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Appreciate it. And if you want any more information about reducing food waste or composting or how you can become a food waste eco-warrior, you can check out Rhode-IslandResourceRecovery.com. They have all the information. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll be back in just a minute with our last guest of the day. Don't go away.